Finding your footing and sense of steadiness in motherhood can feel like a constant uphill battle between endless to do lists, feeling overwhelmed, and that nagging voice in your head telling you that you're not doing enough. It's easy to get stuck in a rut. And here's the thing, a big part of that feeling stuck comes from something called the mental load. It's that invisible weight of keeping track of everything from grocery lists to soccer practice schedules and making sure that it all gets done. For so many moms, it feels like a never ending burden. I want you to know that this is normal and you are far from alone. So many moms struggle with the mental load, myself included. And it can be incredibly frustrating because it often feels like you're just spinning your wheels. And the even bigger challenge, there can be hidden blocks that hold you back on top of all of that pressure that we might not even realize are preventing us from ultimately feeling calmer and more in control. They can make the weight of the mental load even heavier and leave you feeling stuck. So, today we're kicking off a 3-part series designed to dive deep into both the mental load and these hidden obstacles so that you can finally make progress toward a calmer, more manageable experience as a mom. If you are ready to finally get unstuck and feel unstoppable, you're in the right place. Let's simplify things together. I'm Erin Christopoulos, a mother of 2 and teacher turned mom strategist who puts the pieces of mom life together so you don't have to. I get that you're short on time and don't have the capacity to figure out everything on your own, which is why I'm here to help you get clear on where to put your focus while protecting your time and energy so you can actually enjoy these years with your little ones. I'm ditching the overwhelming and unrealistic one-size-fits-all tactics and replacing them with an approach that's practical and personal, because I believe your family is one of a kind with its own qualities and values that deserve an adaptable approach, offering support and encouragement where you need it most. From honest conversations and mindset shifts to practical tips and sustainable strategies, consider this your customizable guide to mom life. With the tools and resources you need at your fingertips, you'll finally have the confidence and clarity you need to bring more intention and ease to everyday life so that you and your family thrive. This is the Mom Life Handbook. Welcome to our very first episode of our 3-part mini-series, Unstuck and Unstoppable. I think you and I can both agree that motherhood is incredible. But when you're constantly managing a million things at once, it can get overwhelming and exhausting. And as a result, a little less enjoyable overall. And if you're here listening to the Mom Life Handbook podcast, I know that you want to experience real change that feels good. You want to be in a position where you really enjoy life as a mom and feel confident in how you're approaching it. So this series feels very important and long overdue. I want us to spend some time today just unpacking and getting on the same page around what the mental load is, as well as identify some of the patterns that we all fall into in trying to manage that mental load that ultimately are leaving us stuck. Now, the truth is, between the endless to-do lists, making sure everyone is fed and dressed, and on top of that, trying to carve out some time for yourself, it's no wonder that we often feel overwhelmed and exhausted. I remember when I first became a mom, thinking that my life was going to relatively stay the same. I was still going to be working a full-time job. I was still going to be managing the upkeep of our home. And I severely underestimated how much more I would have to manage once adding children into the equation. And honestly, I think I was so baffled because in my career, I was a teacher. So I was spending every day with 20 to 30 kids in the same room all day, every day, and managing that really effectively. So I assumed that my experience in the classroom was going to somehow be reflective of what it was to spend all day with my own children. And quite honestly, I probably romanticized it, assuming that it was going to be better when it was my own kids and there were going to be fewer of them. So, how could it be harder? Oh my gosh, it's so much harder. I think there's the aspect of it in the sense that they're your own kids. So the dynamic's a little bit different. And there's the 24/7-ness of it. It just never stops. And it never stops on top of life that never stops, right? So it's this really compounding effect that's exhausting. And it's this constant feeling of having to manage it all that's often referred to as the mental load. And for so many of us, it's relentless. And when this mental load gets overwhelming, it can feel like we're stuck in a cycle of worry, exhaustion, and never feeling ahead. And here's the thing that makes it even more complicated. Sometimes, in an attempt to manage this mental load, our minds actually develop unconscious coping mechanisms that make matters even worse. You have to remember these aren't intentional, but they're probably happening to some extent for all of us in the background without us even being aware of it. They're our brain's way of trying to protect us from feeling overwhelmed, but the problem is these mechanisms have a tendency to backfire and make us feel even more stuck. So I want to spend a few minutes here unpacking some of the coping mechanisms that backfire in hopes that it helps normalize what's going on for so many of us, but then also bring that awareness to the surface so that in the coming episodes in this series, we can begin to identify these patterns at play in our everyday lives and also learn how to overcome them. So, one example of a coping mechanism that could be making the mental load harder to manage is negativity bias. This is our brain's tendency to focus on negative information more than positive information. On an evolutionary level, this strategy is what has helped us to survive by keeping us alert to threats. In the context of the mental load, though, this negativity bias can show up as constant negative self talk, like, I'm a terrible mom, I can't seem to get organized, or I'm the only one who cares about this. These thoughts can be discouraging, but it's important to recognize them for what they are. It's your mind's attempt to manage the pressure by reminding us of the areas that need attention. Something else that comes up often for many of us, and I see this happening so much on social media right now, is resentment. I think that there's been enough talk around the mental load online that enough of us have a growing awareness that the mental load is very real and at play in so many of our lives. But then on the back end of that, it's raising a lot of resentment toward male counterparts in traditional marriages and partnerships. That's because women are shouldering the majority of the mental load for their families. And that feels unfair and unrealistic and unnecessary in this modern day and age. The problem, though, is that as justified as this feeling might be initially, it can ultimately make it harder to communicate effectively and work together as a team. So it's important to recognize that this feeling of resentment can be a signal from our minds that the current situation feels unfair, unsustainable. But dwelling on that resentment is going to keep you stuck in this negative cycle that's not going to help propel you forward toward a solution. And then there's one final default coping mechanism that I want us to explore today, and that's the victim mentality. The mental load is endless. And when you become aware of just how never ending it is, it really can stir up feelings of helplessness and overwhelm. And when those emotions rise to the surface, it's only natural for our protective mechanisms to step in and try to manage that sense of shame or frustration or guilt by placing blame on external factors. I think that acknowledging these challenges is so important, but staying in this mindset can prevent us from finding effective solutions. I fully recognize that the initial function of this coping mechanism might be to protect us from feeling responsible for everything, but ultimately, it keeps us from taking control and making changes. And I really do believe that you have the skills, the capacity, and the strength to no longer be the victim of the mental load. I want to see you feeling empowered and fully in control over your everyday life, regardless of the pressures that are placed upon you. Now, these unconscious coping mechanisms can be so sneaky. It can feel like they're helping us to survive, but in reality, they are making it worse. That negative self-talk can make us feel discouraged from taking action. Resentment can put strain on our relationships, and a victim mentality can keep us in a pattern of feeling helpless for days on end. These mechanisms create a cycle that keeps us stuck in the very situation that we are trying to escape. And I want you to remember this. This is so important. Before we ever try to disrupt any of these default coping mechanisms, please, please, please remember that these are not something to feel guilty about. They are 100% entirely our brain's way of trying to help. The key is to become more aware of these patterns so that we can choose more helpful responses. They're not something to feel guilty about. They haven't been happening on a conscious level. They've just simply been our ways of automatically stepping in and trying to help protect you. But the key here now that you're aware of them is to choose more helpful responses, which we will dive into in next week's episode. So if you haven't already, be sure to hit the follow button so that this show stays in your library and you don't miss that next episode. But in the time being, I want you to take some time to reflect or to notice. Do you find that some of these unconscious coping mechanisms are at play for you? Do you engage in negative self-talk? Do you sometimes feel resentment toward your partner? Or do you feel like this is all so hopeless because it's beyond your control? This is such a simple way to get started with self-reflection, and there's absolutely no right or wrong answer. This is all about becoming aware of these patterns. It's honestly such a big first step forward. Again, in the next episode, we're going to dive deeper into the idea of reframing our thoughts and replacing these default coping mechanisms with more helpful strategies. We'll explore practical tools and techniques to help you manage the mental load and feel more empowered in your motherhood journey. So stay tuned and stay patient. We are in this together, and little by little, we'll make progress in finally overcoming the mental load. And as we wrap up this week's episode, remember, mom life is complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Here's to leading with purpose and intention as you simplify mom life in the week ahead. You've just finished another episode of the Mom Life Handbook podcast. Remember to check out the episode description for all the important links and highlights from today's show. While you're there, tap the subscribe button so that new episodes are always at your fingertips. Before you go, I'd really appreciate hearing your thoughts about the show. It takes as little as 30 seconds to leave a review, and your honest thoughts help me create a better show and help other moms discover it too. And if this episode really helped you out, go ahead and hit the share button to text it to a friend or share it on social media. You never know who in your life might benefit from a little extra support. Don't forget, there are lots of ways to stay connected beyond the podcast. Head over to momlifehandbook.com for additional resources or to learn about how to work with me. And be sure to follow along on Instagram at momlifehandbook. Send me a DM to say hey or to share your thoughts on today's episode. Connecting with you personally is what I really love most. And just in case you need to hear it today, you're doing an incredible job. I know it doesn't always feel like it, but you're here, learning how to be better and do better. Keep working to bring more intention and ease into your life, and know that I'm right here cheering you on. You're creating a beautiful journey for you and your family. I am so proud of you.